attorney and a certified guardian ad litem, as well as a family law attorney, I've also sat as a judge in Superior Court. Because I have that vast variety of experience, I understand some of the things that we need to do in Superior Court to make the DeKalb County bench more efficient. One of the things that I'm looking to do is streamline some of the criminal cases, as well as I am looking to use technology for our non-criminal cases to resolve discovery disputes, as well as any other matters that need to be handled that will require the attorneys to come to court. Finally, one of the things that I would like to do is have individualized calendars for our domestic relations and our civil cases, so that way each of those calendars can have their own special attention. My name is Letitia Deere Jackson, candidate for Judge Corsi's seat to succeed Judge Corsi. It is an open seat. Please vote May 22nd, but you don't have to wait then. You can early vote starting April 30th. My website is letitiaforjudge.com. Thank you.
Thank you. So turning to Fulton County, there are going to be 3 judicial races on your ballot. We have candidates here from all 3 of the races, so we're going to take one race at a time. The first race that is on the ballot that I'm going to talk about is the Georgia Court of Appeals. I could tell you what that court is about, but rather than telling you, I will let one of the candidate who is here, do that. Please welcome Ken Shigley. Ken, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure.
Tell us about the Court of Appeals, why we should care about the Court of Appeals and who sits on that court.
First, I want to thank your daddy. His daddy helped to train the Tuskegee Airmen, without whom my daddy wouldn't have made it back from World War II because they flew escort for his B-17. And he said that when those German jets came out, they were too fast, he couldn't get them. And without the Tuskegee Airmen flying escort, he wouldn't have made it home, and I wouldn't be here. So, thank you. My name is Ken Shigley. It's a funny name at the bottom of the alphabet, rhymes with Piggly Wiggly. I'm running for the Georgia Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals, as it's structured now, hears appeals from all the lower courts, Superior Court, State Court, and so forth, on everything except murder cases. They've simplified that jurisdiction a little bit in the last couple of years, so everything except murder, when it's appealed, goes first to the Court of Appeals. And then if the Supreme Court decides to hear an appeal from that, they can. It's 15 judges who sit in panels of 3, and they look at the paperwork, or now it's PDFs coming up electronically, from the trial courts to decide whether or not the lower court made a mistake. Now, I've been practicing law now for almost 41 years. I started out as an assistant DA where I grew up out in Douglas County. And was prosecuting all sorts of cases. After about a year, I figured out that about 85% of those cases were there because folks were either drunk, stoned, or stupid. Not politically correct terminology, but succinct. And the other 15% were mean or evil and needed to be locked away for enough time to protect the public. Then I left that, did small town general practice for a few years, then went to a law firm where I defended lawsuits around the state for a decade. Then the last 25 years or so, I've been representing people who are hurt, plaintiff's work. When I became state bar president in 2011, Governor Deal's office called me and wanted to put me on this Criminal Justice Reform Council. And I told the guy that called me, the last time I handled a criminal case myself, the indictment was written with a quill pen on parchment, but they wouldn't let me get out of it anyway. And that work has been of great interest in populations that see a lot of the criminal justice system. Now, my mama grew up in a mill village in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where her brother said most of the boys went to prison and most of the girls got knocked up, and somehow grandma got them out of there when they were about 13 and sent them off somewhere else. But as I've worked over the years, I've seen a lot of people who grew up in such neighborhoods and such environments. And the Criminal Justice Reform Council has begun to bend the curve a little bit on the mass incarceration that has inequitably affected the African American community throughout the country. And the past 5 or 6 years, the numbers and the percentages being incarcerated, going to the prison system, have begun to go down. And if I go on the court, then I would volunteer to go back on that Criminal Justice Reform Council and to continue the process of chipping away at the factors that contribute to the inequitable incarceration, which takes guys out of the community, makes them unavailable for marriage and for functioning as daddies and contributing to their families. This is a serious problem. It doesn't relate directly to the function of a judge who rules on cases, but it's one of those things that a judge can volunteer to help with. I've continued since I was bar president on the Judicial Council's Technology Committee, and one of the things that we've got on our hopper right now is relates to this problem of cash bail, and that is to begin notifying people of court dates by text message. In places where it's been tried, it's much more effective than relying on these bail bondsmen. And that's something that we're beginning to work on in Georgia now. There are a lot of factors that go into these problems, and nobody by himself can solve all the problems. But if I have the opportunity to serve on the Court of Appeals, I'll first try to be very conscientious about reading all those briefs and all those transcripts and ruling on the cases based on the facts and the law. And then the hook is getting out. I'm going to give Charles the microphone. Any questions, comments, or bit of criticisms?
Well, while everybody's thinking of questions, let me just ask.
Sure.
Can you give us an example of a criminal case?
Okay.
In which a Court of Appeals judge has made a difference?
Let me think about that a little bit. I think let me just answer more broadly. I'm having trouble thinking of a specific example right now.
Or how can a judge make
Well, I think that being aware of the environmental factors that go into cases coming up there, and having the experience on both sides of the criminal justice process to kind of see what's happened sometimes. I remember a case that I was assigned to prosecute 40 years ago. And in a busy DA's office, sometimes you get handed a case to go prosecute this case. Go try this one next. And I walked in there, and somebody else had already struck the jury, and I took over the case in midstream and we just worked from the sheriff's department's file. And I recognized in midstream that this was a political prosecution. This defendant was a young black guy who was going to college part-time and was working on voter registration in Douglas County in the African-American community, and had applied for a job in the sheriff's office. And it just began to smell bad in the middle of the trial. I did everything I could to lose it, but I couldn't. I couldn't backstroke far enough, fast enough. But when you see things that don't smell right, get your antenna up and look a little harder, because sometimes you get a case that really shouldn't have been prosecuted. Other questions? Yeah. Questions, comments? Thank you for having me tonight.
Let me ask one.
Yeah, sure.
So we will move on.
Sure.
Just ask this. So this is a contested race.
It is a contested race.
There are two candidates in the race.
Both pale males named Ken.
The other person is also named Ken.
That's right.
If the other Ken were here and he had the opportunity to ask you a question, what would that question be? And how would you?
You might ask why I'm running when I'm already too old to get a pension.
What would your answer be?
I see it as an opportunity to give back in the last quarter of a career. The way the pension system is structured, you have to retire by 75, and it takes 10 years to vest, and you can't partially vest. So I would never get the pension. So I'm going to serve until I don't, probably 6 to 12 years.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
How'd that case go?
The jury convicted the guy. He appealed. I tried to lose the appeal. I couldn't. I tried to make the weakest case for the state I could, recognizing what had happened. This was 40 years ago. And you just couldn't lose it. And then when the remediator came in from the Court of Appeals, I just filed it away. I hope he went on and had a good life. It was one of those really moral dilemmas. If I'd been a little bit more mature than I was at 27, I might have dismissed the case in midstream and lost my job and gone on. But at that point, I didn't feel like getting fired that week. Okay. Anybody else? It brings to mind something that's a truism for all these things, and that is that the hardest choices are never between good and bad, but between good and good, and between bad and bad. And hopefully 40 years later, I have enough maturity to make a better choice than I did that day. Anybody else? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ken Shigley, everybody, will be on your ballot. So I am pinch hitting tonight for the real moderator who will be here shortly. But let me tell you a little bit about that individual. His name is Dr. Rashad Ritchie. Dr. Ritchie has been featured on NBC World News, CBS, and a host of magazines and articles highlighting his broadcasting career and community involvement. He's one of the country's youngest nationally syndicated talk radio personalities and can be heard locally on News and Talk 1380 WAOK and the People's Station V103, the nation's largest urban station. In addition to radio, Rashad is on the air as a political analyst for CBS 46 News and provides commentary for Peachtree TV. As a university professor, Rashad knows the difficulties placed on the emerging young scholars of our era, which led him to start the Rashad Ritchie Foundation, an organization dedicated to mentoring teens for college readiness. Rashad is writer for Rolling Out magazine, member of the Atlanta Press Club, the National Black MBA Association, the Atlanta NAACP. He's also a recipient of the Presidential Lifetime Achievement Award from President Barack Obama. So I'm introducing him now, so I wanted to introduce him when he comes. Now, I say I'm a pinch hitter, but I'm really not, because as I understand it, and I only know a little bit about baseball, but a pinch hitter is somebody who was brought in with the expectation that he will perform at the plate better than the designated batter. And I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm just going to pretend until he gets here. The next race we're going to talk about is the race for Superior Court of Fulton County to succeed Judge Thomas Campbell. With all the candidates in that race, please come forward and just have a seat. And I'm going to do this. There's a mic there for you. Can you just one at a time just introduce yourselves and say a little bit about yourself to get things started?
Good evening. My name is Bobby Wolf. It's great to be here. I want to thank everybody from Liberty International for your hospitality. It's really important to have this conversation, and I want to thank you for being interested in these three races: the Court of Appeals, the Superior Court of Fulton County, and the Magistrate Court of Fulton County. It's very important. My name is Bobby Wolf. I'm asking for your vote May 22nd, 2018. This is a nonpartisan race, so it's not Democratic, it's not Republican. It's to replace Tom Campbell, who is retiring. I have two opponents, very fine, decent people. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Fulton County, born and raised. My parents grew up here, my grandparents, my great-grandparents came here over a century ago. So we're invested in this community. As a kid, I was an Eagle Scout.
Also, as a child, I was involved in lots of other activities and charities. After college and law school, I came back to Georgia to be a prosecutor. And I have protected our community for the past 25 plus years. First in Cobb County, then in Fulton County for 18 years in the DA's office, and lastly for the last 4 years in Gwinnett County. And one of the things that I've noticed, and one of the big reasons why I'm running and asking for your vote May 22nd, is that Fulton County Superior Court has the opportunity and really the responsibility to be the best, most efficient, well-run court in the state. And it does many things really well. In fact, I see one of my favorite judges, Judge Russell, here, and she knows, I think, what I'm talking about. Fulton County can be a very efficient court, but what I bring is my experience from Cobb County and Gwinnett County to Fulton County. And lastly, I just want to say thank you again for this opportunity to answer your questions tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Farmer. I'd also like to thank the facility, the church, and the moderators for having us, and thank you for showing interest in it. My name is Kevin Farmer. I've been in Fulton County for 35 years. My father moved me down here when I was in the middle of 9th grade. I've been in Sandy Springs those 35 years. I went to Riverwood while Bobby was my arch rival at North Springs. Really good rivals. I've been a lawyer for 22 years. I still live in Sandy Springs. My kids go to public school at North Springs now. I began my legal career as a public defender. And the first judge I was assigned to was, there she is in the back, Judge Russell. I left public defense after 4 years because I had kids and I needed to make more money. So I went into private practice where I ran my own small firm for 9 years doing civil work, contract law, property disputes, domestic relations, divorces, child custody, and the occasional personal injury case. And then I went back to being a conflict defender, where I went back into the Fulton County criminal justice system and worked to represent indigent folks again. And I knew in the middle of my career that this was going to be a goal of mine. And part of what I thought a judge needed to have was a wide variety of experience and a wide range of cases that they've seen and executed. And I've also been in front of a bunch of different judges. I haven't been stuck in one county for my career. When I was in private practice, I went from Somerville down to Adel. So I've seen a wide variety of courtrooms. I've seen what works, what doesn't work, what's sufficient. And we've all seen judges that treat you with respect and judges that don't treat you with respect. And I think we can probably all agree that everybody that goes in front of a judge should be respected. But at the end of toward the end, I was being a conflict defender, and I knew I was missing one piece to complete my base of knowledge to run for judge, and that was being a district attorney. So for the past 2.5 years, I've been down in Clayton County as a senior district attorney, and I think I'm probably the only one up here who's both defended a murder client to an acquittal and also prosecuted a murder defendant to acquittal. So I have that wide range of perspective, and that's what I hope to bring to the bench. Fulton County has a lot of good things on their bench. The Clayton County really doesn't. They have a drug court. Clayton County just got drug court. They have a veterans court. They have a mental health court. These are things that can help because mental health is a big part of the criminal justice system. But criminal cases are only a part of what a superior court judge sees. If you get divorced, you're going to go in front of a superior court judge. If you have child support issues, you're going to go in front of a superior court judge. If the city of Atlanta wants to build a road where your house is through eminent domain, and you don't like it, you're going to go to a superior court judge. So it's not just the criminal aspect being a judge that I bring. I think I've got that unique wide range of experience, and I'm going to ask for your vote both on May 22nd and actually starting on April 30th. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Fani Willis. You spell that F-A-N-I. Last name is Willis. I came to Atlanta to attend Emory Law School back in 1993 after graduating from Howard University. When I came to Emory, it honestly provided every opportunity I hoped it would. I was able to win the national moot court there for the first time in history, and it just gave me a wide range of experiences and prepared me very well. I also have defended a murderer because my first job out of law school was at a small law firm right here on Cleveland Avenue. And I did that for some time, and I always say that was the type of law firm that we did what came through the door with some money law. And the reason I say that is because when you're in a small firm, you have to serve that community. And you serve that community in all different types of cases. We had to serve them if they needed a divorce, if someone was charged with a crime, if there's a bond hearing, if they had a small contractual dispute with a neighbor. Those were the type of cases that we took. And so that was the first stop in my career, and I always say that was better experience than I even realized at the time, because it just took all fear away, because you had to go and do the job. From there, I went into sole practice, where I worked everywhere from Douglas County through Fulton County for some years, and mainly did juvenile court law, but certainly served the citizens of Fulton County during that time period, because that was a lot of my client base, because I had left this for Fulton County firm. Went from there to the city of Atlanta as a solicitor, where I served for about 18 months doing city ordinances and arguing about preliminary hearings and murder cases. And then I went to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, where I had been for the last 16 years, 4 months, and 4 days. I resigned on February the 28th, and the reason I resigned is because I wanted to commit to doing this full time. I didn't want anyone to accuse me of doing something unethical, making deals on cases while you're trying to run a campaign. And so I decided that it was in my best interest to just commit to this and, kind of step out on faith. While at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, I have literally tried every case known. I've tried the longest case in Georgia's history. I've tried RICO cases, I've tried domestic cases, burglaries, anything you can name, I have tried. I have tried probably close to 200 trials at this point in my career. I also supervised the absolute largest division of the Fulton County District Attorney's Office and had 25 lawyers that reported to me. Those lawyers were responsible for what I call all the bread and butter cases. That's everything from aggravated assault, drug trafficking, and to armed robberies. You don't need to leave Fulton County to find out how to do this job right. You need to serve it. And my whole career has been spent serving it. We do have different judges, and I can't tell you that all of them are the judge that I emulate to be. So the reason I decided to run for this position, because quite frankly, I love being a trial lawyer. I'm very good at it. But I saw 3 things that really troubled me while serving the citizens of Fulton County, and they motivated me to run. The first was, we have a certain section of judges that are creating what's called a backlog calendar. A backlog calendar is a few of the judges haven't gotten to their cases. And so now Fulton County is paying senior judges to come in and try cases that are 5 and 6 years old because judges didn't get to them. That is not a service to the victim. That is not a service to the defendant. And that is not a service to the community at large. It is hard for a private citizen to be able to find witnesses 5 years later. And because of my experience, I was the one that was stuck with trying a 5-year-old murder where they can't find the witnesses. It just did a disservice to the community where I lived. The second reason I decided to run is because all the judges aren't perfection. Some are very respectful and some are very nice. I'm not talking about judges that hold you to the fire and say you have to meet your deadlines. But I watched a few take what I thought was personal attacks, both on citizens and on litigators. And I thought that was completely inappropriate and not necessary and didn't serve the community at large. And so then that motivated me. The third motivation, quite frankly, is I've been a single mother for the last 18 years, and so I've been a public servant, and I certainly was paid a fair salary. But being in that position, I live in South Fulton, I have a nice home, and I started to see that different demographics, it seemed to be more important if your door was kicked in some places than the other. And that shouldn't be that way. Lady Justice really should be blind. And so I kind of decided it was like voting. At some point, if you don't vote, you don't get to complain anymore because you didn't participate in the process. And so if I did not offer myself up for public service to the bench, that he is absolutely right. I've been through a divorce. When you're going through a divorce, you don't want to wait 3 years because there's a backlog and a judge didn't come do their job. I've also represented people in a divorce, and I know how stressful that is for you. And so you should have a judge that has the qualifications, that has had a little civil and a little criminal, but you don't need to run to another county to get it. You can stay right here and serve the citizens of this county, and that is what I've done with my entire career. And on April the 30th, I'm asking you to go to the polls and vote for me.
Before I turn it over to the moderator, to the real moderator, a couple things. not only has the real moderator arrived, but the real sponsor has arrived. He's not in the room now, but the real sponsor of this event is a group called the Voter Empowerment Collaborative. Reverend Albert Love, back there in the back, is here. Will you stand up and be recognized? So the other thing I'm going to do before I turn it over to the moderator, if I'm going to ask our candidates, based on what's been said so far, if you think there's anything incomplete with respect to the issue of what does the Superior Court do and why should anybody care about it, would you please fill in there? But the other thing I want you to do is tell me what you would say to anybody who would say, we've already got enough prosecutors on the bench.
Well, first of all, I think that we hit on what a Superior Court judge does. They definitely decide criminal matters. They look at civil matters in terms of both family law. They have a couple of judges that are designated to do family law, but every judge on the Superior Court will rotate to that process at some point. And then they also handle civil disputes. I would say to the person that says that we have too many lawyers that have been past prosecutors on the bench to look at some of the prosecutors that currently serve on the bench and how efficiently they move their numbers. The reality is, people will tell you that there are more civil cases in Fulton County. What they're doing when they do that is they're taking the family law section that you would be designated to a while, plus the civil. The reality is, Fulton County has a lot of cases. And you need someone that can come to the bench and be ready on day one to handle lots of cases. The particular courtroom that we're talking about, and this judge, has a very heavy caseload with lots of old cases. You need someone that can put boots to the ground on day one and make sure that that calendar moves, that people are treated fairly, and that justice happens.
I'm going to agree with Fonnie. I think we touched on what Superior Court judges do. They do, as I said, it's civil, it's divorce. There is a domestic relations section. You do cycle through it. So I think we did touch on that. As far as do we have too many prosecutors on the bench? I think we have, short answer is no, but the long answer is I think so. I think everybody who's been up there who is a judge should have some time as a prosecutor, because it's one of the things you're going to see. That's the reason I did this. Now, you know, I didn't run away from Fulton County. Clayton County presented the opportunity to me, and that's why I took it, because I knew I had to get it. But I think who's ever elected should have experience in all the different areas that a Superior Court judge is going to see. And I think, you know, I've only spent 2.5 years as a prosecutor. Like I said, I began my career as a public defender. So I really have seen both sides of that coin, and I have seen huge backlogs. And again, I'm going to agree, trying to find witnesses 3-4 years later is crazy. You know, you have to prioritize what's going to come, because there are folks that are incarcerated. You got to get them dealt with first, because if you're not guilty of something, you're presumed innocent. You're going to go to the top of the line. You need to get your stuff dealt with first. But you do need to hold people's feet to the fire while being respectful. When you set a case, when you specially set a case and say, Monday we're going to trial, and lawyers come in and say, well, I need a little time. Nope, you had 3 weeks, a month to get ready for this. If this doesn't go, that just adds to the backlog, and that creates the problem. You do have to run it efficiently, and I think having been on both sides of that, I think I'm in a unique perspective to do that. Thank you.
First, let's look at the numbers. There are 20 Superior Court judges in Fulton County, 10 are prosecutors, half. So that's good balance. But let's also talk about diversity of experience. I've been a prosecutor longer than anybody in this room at the stage, maybe not in the audience, because I see some friends. That means a lot. That means for over 25 years, I've fought for victims and fought for justice every day in the trenches. Also, where I had a case where the evidence wasn't there, I would make the tough call and not prosecute the case. A lot of times, that's where there's justice. But there's also diversity of experience. And my diversity of experience is in other ways. Working in Cobb County, working in Gwinnett County, and bringing that experience, those 7 years to Fulton County, makes a big difference. for the past 4 years on a daily basis in Gwinnett County, I've seen two things, small and big, but stuff that we tried to implement in Fulton County, but we couldn't get consensus to do it. And then I see it working well in Gwinnett. And as a native Fulton County resident, that really gets under my skin, because Fulton County, again, should be the best, and it has that potential. I also, secondly, every day for 4 years, see things in Gwinnett that are done more efficiently that we never even thought of. But as soon as you see it, it makes total sense. And that's my pledge to you, is that we're going to bring that efficiency, that customer service. We don't have unlimited taxpayer dollars to bring. So think about that diversity of experience. Also, I'm uniquely qualified and active in our community, both through my neighborhood association, where I'm the immediate past president and board member for 700 homes, where I volunteered for the last 3 years in Gwinnett with a juvenile reentry program called STRAP, which is universally praised, where we take 16 and 17-year-olds. And I want to talk about it just for a minute, because we just had the graduation a few months ago. I was there celebrating the moment with 20 young men and women who 2 or 3 years earlier had been caught up in the juvenile court process. Their families were there as well. One mother in particular, it was obvious that they were talking about her son. Not only had he just graduated, but he got a special leadership award as part of the STRAP program through the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Department. She was running through the crowd with her phone to try to capture the moment on video. I don't know if she was taking video or photos, but she was so proud. And I talked to her afterwards, and what she told me was really telling. And it's why I volunteer there on Saturdays. It's why I went to the graduation. It's why I have that diversity of experience, not just in the courthouse, but in our community. And she said, that's my little baby. I remember him the day he was born. And I never in a million years thought we would be at this low point 18 months ago. I never thought he'd be in juvenile court. And we thought we were hopeless. And then also, I never thought this day would come, that he's graduating from this program. And there's hope for that entire family, brothers, sisters, aunts and uncles were there, for family after family after family. That's my diversity of experience, and that's what I bring to the Fulton Superior Court bench as a prosecutor and as a fellow citizen.
Thank you. How's everybody doing?
Outstanding.
I'm Rashad Ritchie. I do the 6 o'clock news every weekday on CBS 46, so excuse my tardiness. We are here. I heard from the candidates. Great field of candidates. Let's get into some of the questions. Here's what I need you guys to do. I need to limit the answers to 1 minute. I was told I do not have a timer in the audience, so when I feel like it's 1 minute, I'm just going to say time. Okay? I know I'm asking for a small miracle for lawyers to say something within 1 minute, but I know you can do it. There's a lot of talk now about judges, especially Superior Court judges, connecting to community. And second chances for people who come before you. I want to know your judicial philosophy as it relates to second chance sentencing. And we'll start right here, Bobby, and go down the road.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
It's a great question. What I've experienced, again, over 25 years, is that there are some defendants who are truly dangerous. And I do want to say first that a judge's first role is to protect our community from those dangerous individuals. Not because they're bad people, but because they're a danger. And I've sat down with mothers and fathers of those defendants because they wanted to talk to me. And I said, look, I am not saying that your child is a bad person, but because what he did was so dangerous, he needs to be isolated from the rest of us for our safety, our children's safety. But that's a small percentage. The vast majority of the defendants that have come before the court that I've always been in either can't get out of their own way, never got a real start in the first place. They were behind everybody else from the get-go, suffer from addiction. By the way, a third of all people incarcerated in Georgia prisons in 2017, a third have had mental health evaluations and have mental health issues. So I'm absolutely about second chances. That's what I was just talking about with the STRAP program. It's not just for 17-year-olds. It's for everybody. This is not a factory of some sort. We're dealing with individual lives. And I will, as a prosecutor, I've fought for victims, absolutely. But defendants deserve a second chance if it's a nonviolent offense where we can help them. The pendulum, I know I'm way over a minute, but I'll just say quickly.
You had a lawyer minute.
Yes, this is lawyer time, so I'll be brief. I'll cut myself off in a second. The pendulum really has swung over the last quarter century, where it used to be no matter how violent or nonviolent the offense, if you were a repeat offender, you'd go to prison. We've gotten a lot smarter. And thank you to Mr. Shigley, thank you to Governor Deal, thank you to the Criminal Justice Reform Council for making that happen. And so yes, I'm all about second chances because we're only as strong as our weakest link. We're in this together.
There are people that you're mad at, and there are people you're scared of. The people you're scared of, they're the ones that have to be separated. The people you're mad at, it's because they made a dumb decision. Second chances, Fulton County has a pretrial program. We talked about people who make mistakes while they're on drugs. There's a drug court program. There are programs in place for that. I'm a firm believer in that. But what I'm also a firm believer in is that those second chances are evenly distributed and evenly applied. I was a public defender. You see people who, come in with private lawyers. You see people that have better. They get to go. They come in with their client who's already, hey, I've already sent my guy to this program and that program. Can I get this? So the person who doesn't have money to go to these private programs before they come to court, well, are they going to be able to get that same second chance? They should. The second chance, whether or not you get a second chance, shouldn't depend on your economic background. It really should be evenly applied and distributed. So obviously, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds that are coming before you, I was 17 once. I'm going to stop right there. But yes, I believe in second chances.
I hate to quote Mr. Shigley, but I think he was telling you about when he was a prosecutor, and the reality is that most defendants make bad choices. They're doing something stupid, but they are not the sector that is just evil. Everyone can get a second chance because we do have those particular defendants that they are such a danger to our community that they're not the ones that we give a second chance. But I tell people all the time, as a prosecutor, you are in such a better position to help people because you can make decisions regarding charges and sentencing and recommendations and programs, and absolutely across the board people should be given second chances, except for that small section of society that is just too dangerous.
Let's talk about probation. The state of Georgia has the highest per capita population of people who are currently on probated sentences. And much of that is external of the Superior Court because it deals with private probation. You guys don't deal in private probation. But the question still remains. Individuals get placed on probation. Many of them had a public defender. So that means the courts determined they didn't have a lot of money. And the probated sentence says, you got to do this, do that, and pay money. Would you as a judge violate anyone, send them to prison, if their only offense is a technical offense of not being able to pay probation? And Ms. Willis, we'll start with your comment.
You've probably asked a question that's right there on the line of ethics of what we can answer specifically about cases. What I will tell you from working in...
Am I on candidate 7 right now?
You're right there on the line.
4.2.
4.2, not quite there, okay.
You're right there. But what I would tell you is I've been in Fulton County. We are not violating people from probation for technical offenses, as you say. Someone is doing their pretrial, they're doing their classes, they're doing the other things that they need. That's not the person that you're going to violate because they couldn't make a financial. That's just not, I don't know if other counties, but that's not something that is seen in Fulton County where people are being violated just for financially not being able to meet the requirement. Now what you see is they're not paying money, they don't go to the class, they haven't seen their probation officer in 3 years. those kind of issues are more when someone is likely to get revoked. And honestly, even then, oftentimes they're getting a chance to come before the judge and be given a speech about, this is your last opportunity to get it right.
You mentioned private probation, and that's misdemeanor
Right.
offenses, and that's not Superior Court. I can speak from A, being in Fulton County, and B, other counties. I don't know, the warrants are brought by probation officers. And, their probation officers are assigned to courtroom. I can just speak to my particular one that I'm assigned to now. She won't bring a petition just for failure to pay. You have to go, pick up a new charge, you skip all your classes, abscond for a year and a half. It doesn't come before my judge, that I'm in front of right now. He never has to even make that decision. But obviously, we can't prejudge a case, say what we would and wouldn't do on anything, other than to say that I would take each case that came before me on its own individual basis and look at it on its own and make a determination independently based on those independent facts and what that person has done or hasn't done.
If I could just add two things. One is that it's the judge's duty to enforce and to apply the law. And it's the legislature's job to make the law. And there's a law on the governor's desk right now, and I don't know if the governor's going to sign it or not. It's the last leg of criminal justice reform. Also, part of what's already been passed, what we already see in court, is that after a few years, probation ends. So, we don't see 5-10 years of probation just ad infinitum like we used to. It's only for 2 or 3 years if it's probation. I do want to say one thing though, don't forget the victims. It's important to talk about the accused and all of their rights, but also the victims. And so if somebody's house gets broken in, if you can't afford to replace that window, then the defendant should be obligated to pay the restitution. The judge has to find that it's a fair amount of money. The judge has to find the defendant's ability to pay it. But if you found those two things, a judge also has a responsibility to the victim.
Thank you. Kevin, I'm going to start with you on this question. The background of a Superior Court judge, outside of the law, outside of lawyering, what have you done? What's your experience, background, working with the community or community endeavors?
Okay. I've been in Sandy Springs for 35 years. I went to Riverwood High School. After high school, I was originally from Wisconsin. I went back to the University of Wisconsin for college. And then I came back down, and I took a few years off before I went to law school. I worked in a civil firm, learning what big civil firms were like. And then I moved to Montana and bartended for 2 years. Before I came back to school and went to school at Mercer. And Mercer is down in Macon, and they're very involved in their community. And I came back up, and my community involvement was, I went into public service. I became a public defender. And then I started raising my kids. I have two, I've been married to the same woman for 21 years. We met in high school, started dating after college. And both my children are in high school at North Springs. And they are a full-time job for me. The charity that I work most with is breast cancer. My wife has been through it twice. So that is our charity of choice. And that's what I do. I spend my time with my children. They both have varied interests. One is a big singer. She loves doing that. The other one rides bikes. So we travel around the country riding bicycles. But working with the community, while I was in private practice, I was certified as a guardian ad litem by the ABLF, because there are those divorces that you hear that are, TI, having child support issues, and then there are ones you don't hear anything about, and they're still fighting about their kids, and they both love their kids, but they have to have someone looking out for that child. So that's what I did. I went and got certified as a guardian ad litem so that I could help folks that couldn't afford one. And that's the way I did. And then I went back and was a conflict defender and did that again.
Mr. Wolf.
Just right over. Oh, I'm sorry.
It reminds me of a funny story, just real quickly. Don't count this against my minute. When I first started in Fulton County,
He's such a lawyer, y'all.
I was in juvenile court. It was pretty chaotic, 10 conversations going on. We were talking about this story earlier. I didn't think it would come up here. And the deputy finally said, Mr. Wolf, the judge needs your attention. And I looked at the judge, her veins were popping out of her head, and she said, for the last time, Mr. Fox, Mr. Fox, I need your attention. Anyway, I'm Bobby Wolf. So that's one of those funny stories. So here's what I would say. It's one thing to dedicate your career to public service, but it's still a job. I think the big thing I've tried to do is live by the idea that we're part of a community. I don't just go home, close the door. As much as I cherish my wife and my 8-year-old son, and I agree with Kevin on that. Family's the most important thing, and I commend you for that. Growing up, our family was always told to help the other person. And one example, year after year, my mother would take me door to door to raise money for multiple sclerosis research. And when I was a little bit older, I didn't really understand why we picked that charity. But I asked her, and I said, do we know someone who suffered from this insidious disease? She said, no, just those folks need help. And there was just something about it, something altruistic from my mom that I took with me. And I mentioned earlier, I was very involved in the Boy Scouts, and as an Eagle Scout, gave back to the community. It's been really important as an adult. The Fulton County DA's office has a community prosecution division now. It's their job, and they do an excellent job at it. But I was one of the volunteers before that program got off the ground. And I would volunteer on my own time. Everybody's familiar with the NPUs. I was at NPU D with Felicia Moore, who's now our city council president, and then later with NPU B for several years, forging those relationships. Again, very involved in my community. I live in Buckhead and Garden Hills. I was also on a steering committee called Buckhead Redefined to look at the traffic, and even if you don't live in that area, everybody drives through. Traffic is horrible, to figure out how are we going to plan Buckhead, Midtown, Downtown, and the entire area of Fulton County for what it's going to look like 20 or 30 years from now. So in all those ways, I've tried to give back outside of the job itself.
Yes, ma'am.
Like Bobby, I've done the programs through the job, but I'm not going to talk about them going to read to children and things of that nature. But that is really on the job work because you're doing it as part of an organization. What I do outside of work that has nothing to do with work and doesn't render any financial pay is one thing I have done is found a nonprofit organization which is called For the Love of Carla, and it affects people that have sickle cell. Sickle cell is one of my big callings in life. The reason I started that was something very personal to me. My friend is 45 years old and she's a vegetable. She's a vegetable as a result of sickle cell. And what I found as a family, and not a blood family, but as an extended family, is there are all these expenses that families incur when you're sitting in the hospital time after time, just in parking and meals. And so that was the purpose of the organization, was to give small scholarships to families. And we're not talking about a lot of money, $500, just to kind of offset those costs. I'm also a huge member and a proponent. We started an organization recently called WAVE, W-A-V-E. So we all value excellence. It's been around for about 2 years now. Interestingly enough, the purpose of WAVE started out for homelessness. But what we have ended up doing is a lot with children. Because you quickly learn that children are impacted by homelessness. And so one of those things, we'll go and put clothes together to give to the homeless, or go out literally on Saturday and feed the homeless. This past Saturday, me and my fiance spent hiding eggs all over the place for about 200 underprivileged kids and giving them Easter baskets so that they would have something that is just kind of out of reach and extra for them. And so WAVE is really my big calling right now. And I keep fighting to get on this board of the sickle cell group, but they haven't put me on the board yet. So that's what my next step is.
I talked to them. I had them on my show today, actually. Yeah. Okay. I have to manage the time. We do have a second segment to get to. I want to make sure I go to the audience. I always go to the audience for Q&A. And if there are any audience questions, we will take a few. You all will have 1 minute to answer those questions, and then I will allow you to do an outro, and we'll bring our second set. Right in the back, Reverend Love, and then Madam, you will be next.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. My question is, which one of the Supreme Court justices come closer to your worldview, to your philosophical, legal, judicial worldview? And why?
Yeah, anybody can take a crack at that.
I have the really just the blessing and the privilege of having Justice Benham as my mentor. I mean, I can literally call him.
No, Supreme Court,
Oh,
United States.
not the state Supreme Court. That's a harder question. Let me think about it. Let me think about that one, so I'll answer it.
I'll answer it like this, because we've all been talking to folks, to citizens, asking for votes. That's what we do. And I can't speak for either one of these two, but one of the questions I get is, are you a Democrat or a Republican? How do you feel about this issue or that issue? And my answer is always the same to them. Am I a Democrat or Republican? Neither and both. As a judge, you know, we don't lean one way or the other. As a trial court judge, Mr. Shigley's running for Court of Appeals. As a trial court judge, we use the law as it is. And we apply the law as it is. The facts to the law as it is. Our job is not to interpret. If you don't like the way we rule, then you go up to Mr. Shigley and you say, hey, change it.
Hey, don't jinx me before I get there.
But to say which way we lean, I lean toward the law. And that's the best answer I can give to that question. You know, I'm not going to say I'm Justice Scalia or I'm Justice Ginsburg. I can't do that. I apologize.
You know, it's an interesting question, and running for this race has just been such an amazing experience in many ways. It brings back a lot of memories. And asking that question made me think of one of my favorite trial court judges when I first started in Fulton. And you might know him. His name is Isaac Jenrette. And he had a very interesting background, was no nonsense. He could not have been nicer. My first day I said, Judge, I'm here, I'm excited. And you know, rule number one about being a prosecutor is know your judge. You know, that's a good first step. And so I wanted to know, okay, what makes Judge Jenrette tick? He said, come with me. So we went into his chambers, went over to the window, looked out the window, and we saw the Judicial building, which was across the way where the Court of Appeals and the state Supreme Court are. And he said, when you argue in front of me, and when you give me law, and when you try cases, I want them to go to the Court of Appeals, go to the state Supreme Court, and stay there. I don't want them coming back because of anything you've done. So as a prosecutor, my job has always been to get it right the first time, try a clean case. And I think that's the real responsibility of a trial court judge, is to be ready to try a case, try a clean case, and so it doesn't really matter who's on the appellate courts because it will be affirmed because I did a good job. And that's why this race is so important. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And I want to say this in all fairness to Reverend Love. We have, 20? I think it's 20 judges on the bench in Superior Court for Foortage County. You can give these judges the same case, the same facts, the same individuals, and each of those judges will render somewhat of a different verdict, a different sentence. There's a variation. And I think Reverend Love's point was if you identify with Supreme Court Justice, maybe we can get an indication of your judicial philosophy. And so, Ms. Willis, go ahead.
The question wasn't, what is the question?
Well, it's still Reverend Love. Reverend Love's question about Supreme Court Justice. And whatever your answer is, I will allow it to stand.
And I think that it's one of those questions where you don't ever want to cross the line of answering. What I would say to you is, because I have been a trial lawyer so long, there was part of Bobby that I agree with. There was a judge years ago that I was trying cases in front of. And I spent most of my time as a prosecutor screening myself because I knew they would let the evidence in, but it was wrong. I could get it in if I wanted to, either because of their deficiency and knowledge of the law or their leaning towards the state. And so you find yourself, if you're really an excellent attorney, making sure that you don't do things that are improper. And it's when you ask me about Supreme Court justices, when I really pay attention to their decisions, which is why I hesitate in answering, is usually when I'm kind of yelling at the paper because I disagree with something they've done. But the truth is, as a trial judge, you have to follow what the law is and what the rules are. But you make a very interesting point. Other than mandatory sentences, it is true you will get different variations on sentencing. What I will say to you is, I have a lot of defense bar support. And people wonder, why do you have all of this defense bar support? You've been a prosecutor here for 16 years. And the reason is because I have bent over backwards to be fair. I had a defense attorney tell me she was attacked for supporting me because why are you supporting another prosecutor? And she told me a story I didn't remember, which was that on a Friday night, a young lady who was selling herself or was a witness to a crime made an appointment to see me, and I sat and I waited there for the lady to come, and she didn't come. And then she called me and said, I'm so sorry, I apologize, but the lady said she can come on Sunday, and I know that's a lot to ask, will you come on Sunday? And I came on Sunday and I interviewed her, and I said, well, you're gonna have to give me like a week or two because she's given me some very interesting information, but I need to go investigate, make sure I corroborate some of the things she said. She said, you ultimately dismissed that case. Do you know how many prosecutors aren't interested in justice? They wouldn't have took their Friday night to wait on the lady. They would have discounted her because she was a prostitute. They certainly wouldn't have wasted their time on a Sunday. And so what I would say to you is the support that I am getting is because people know, as a prosecutor, I was just in a position. Not that I'm better than those defendants, but I was in a position to help more people, and I try to always do what was right. That doesn't mean give people what they want, because sometimes you have to tell people no, they gonna hurt somebody and it's time for them to go to prison. But there are so many times that you can be creative and do something that is fair in the best interest of everyone.
Okay. And I have time for one more question from the audience, and then we have to do our second set. Madam?
Yes, I just wanted to know, what is your position on the privatization of prisons? It really concerns me, this trend that we're going in, and I want to know, you personally, how do you feel about that? Are you in support of the privatization of prisons? If so, why? And if not, what are the things that alarm you about it?
This is a lot like the Supreme Court judge question. This is something that a Superior Court judge, this is something that the legislature has to take up. This is nothing that a Superior Court judge is going to get involved in. And personal feelings aside, what the law is what is going to be applied in my courtroom. I guarantee there are going to be laws I agree with and laws I don't agree with. Just because I don't believe them, my job is to apply them as they are. Again, there's a gold dome a block and a half away from the Fulton County Courthouse. That's where that question needs to be addressed. I wish I could answer your question better than that, but you don't want a judge, a Superior Court judge, injecting his or her opinion into legislative matters, quite frankly. So I'm going to politely dodge that question.
And if I could answer it in a slightly different way, not about the privatization of probation, but the purpose of a sentence. Prison, of prison, thank you. But what is the purpose of prison? What is the purpose of a sentence in general? I think it's important to understand that, because ultimately, I have a good feeling that everybody in this room who lives in Fulton County is going to vote May 22nd, if not sooner, starting April 30th. I commend you, because you're interested, and I ask that you share tonight with your friends and family as well. You care and understand about it. The reason why Fulton County Superior Court matters to us, and we'll just talk about the criminal part of it right now, is that the judge within the law has a lot of discretion. The judge can choose whether it's going to be a probated sentence, how much probation. There are wide ranges. Aggravated assault, as an example, it could be as little as 1 year of probation, as much as 20 years of prison. So you need to choose and elect someone who can use that discretion wisely. And that's why I'm asking you, and I would say that on that issue, I am uniquely qualified, because for over 25 years, I've had to make that decision on a daily basis. We do have some judges, I won't say a lot, but some judges who are going to follow the prosecutor's recommendation no matter what.
Right.
And they're certainly not going to go above the prosecutor's recommendation. That rarely happens. So I've had a dress rehearsal for this job for over 25 years by making the right recommendation in the first place. That sentence needs to serve several purposes. One, if somebody's dangerous, is isolation. Another big one is rehabilitation. We already talked about the fact that at least a third of the people in prison have mental health issues. So rehabilitation is huge. And that goes for drug addiction as well, and alcohol. Restitution, to make the victim whole. You know, your window gets broken out, or worse. You know, you're in the hospital, you lose your job, you deserve restitution. Restitution needs to be part of that sentence. And also to send a deterrent to everybody else that we live in a civilized society and we're not gonna put up with this. So I do think the judge is supremely important, because the judge, last thing I'll say, the judge can accept a negotiated plea where the defense attorney and the DA come together and say, Judge, please accept this. The judge can either accept it or reject it. And same thing if the lawyers don't agree. It's ultimately up to the judge, and the judge does have a ton of discretion. That's something I've always used wisely. I took an oath. Well, thank you all as well. This is a really important conversation. And I'll say this for all three of us. We took an oath as prosecutors to seek justice, not an expedient conviction, not a number, not a statistic, but to do the right thing. And if the case takes you down a path where you can't prove the case, or the person should never go to prison, that there's a better way, if the facts support that, we can't prejudge anything, then that is a prosecutor's responsibility. And you know, that's what I've done for a quarter century.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ms. Willis, before you answer that question, and please go to Senator Mike, I just want to say, and I do not speak for everybody here, I'm speaking for myself, there's a hypersensitivity in our community when people say, we just follow the law.
Exactly.
And the reason why is because we went through an era in the 50s and 60s when men simply followed the law, that wore black robes. And those laws were antithetical to the black man and black woman. And so that's where the sensitivity comes from. Ms. Willis?
I cannot answer the privatization question, but what I can say, which is, it's interesting that that's what you said, is if judges are uncomfortable with following the law, they can give certificates of review for a higher court to look at it if they are unsure of that decision. So there are things that judges can do. I had a judge recently tell me, you know, I was asking for them to change a sentence, to make the sentence less. And what they told me is they were not queen for the day, that they were a judge and that they had to follow the rules. And that's important. You do have to follow the rules. But there are things and discretion that can be done that are just humane. And you can make decisions that are humane decisions that certainly, while you are unsure of if this was appropriate, somebody can be out on bond while we wait to see if the Court of Appeals says that this is correct. So there are certain things that you can do that are humane while doing your ethical and legal duty, because that's what you're there to do. You're not there to just make the law or be the legislature, but you can certainly do things that are humane to make sure that you are following it appropriately, and if there's a benefit that someone can receive, that they do receive it.
All right. Thank you. 1 minute outro, and we'll go to our second set, and we'll begin with you, Mr. Wolf. Go down the line.
Well, again, thank you to everybody. I want to thank you for your time and attention. Again, I'm Bobby Wolf. I'd appreciate your vote May 22nd for this race, and it's for several reasons. It's my experience in the courtroom. It's my experience in the community. We are in this together. We are a community together. We need to protect the community when appropriate. We need to protect the victim in all cases, and we need to look more creatively, as we've discussed tonight. One of my life-changing experiences that I've not discussed yet, and I want to end on this, is that I was in Leadership Atlanta. And Ms. Hart, it's such a pleasure to see you. Your daughter and I were in the same class, and it was a transformational experience to be in a group of 75 people from throughout Metro Atlanta with a common purpose to serve in many ways. There were a few lawyers in the group, doctors, nonprofit people, religious leaders, you name it. I think you're familiar with Leadership Atlanta. It's a fantastic opportunity. I'm extremely proud. I'm more proud of that than being an Eagle Scout. I'm more proud of that than even being a prosecutor. It's just one of those experiences. And so I just want to tell you that I will be that judge who's efficient, who brings the experience from Cobb and Gwinnett, so that we run an efficient, business-like court, but then we don't forget that everybody who comes from that court is the last place they expected to be, especially in these criminal cases, because that's what we're focused on. And the least the judge can do is make that experience better. I tell victims all the time, it's like trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again sometimes. You can't imagine the suffering that some of the victims and victims' families have suffered. But the least we can do as prosecutors, and now as a judge, is not to victimize the victim or the defendant through the process. It's an awesome responsibility, and I ask for your vote May 22nd. And again, thank you to the church, and thank you to all. You could have been a million other places. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you again, Kevin Farmer. And to address your point, following the law, I agree with you. And following the law, there is room built in. And following the law means applying it evenly across social ranges, across racial ranges, across sex ranges. It has to be applied to every citizen the same. And you have to temper mercy, which is your second chances, if a 17-year-old does something stupid, with justice and hard justice. And there are victims, absolutely, who need to be made whole, and then they have civil remedies. And that's part of what being, a lawyer and a judge is been able to have more than just criminal. I know we spent a lot of time on it today, upon the criminal. And I can tell you that there is the law, and we want to apply it, but it's going to be applied evenly and with discretion. Prosecutors can come in front. We haven't talked about recidivism at all. The 3 strikes and you're out. There are things prosecutors can do to take discretion away from a judge. We want to run it efficiently. I've been in front of judges in Fulton County. When that calendar call comes up, there's only one answer you were allowed to have: ready. That's all you were allowed to do. You said ready. And that's how you get your case down. You make the lawyers try their cases. Because sometimes lawyers can get lazy. You've got to make them work. Because our tax dollars are paying for that court. You want that system to work efficiently. The fact that I've run my own firm for 9 years, had to, go to civil court for 9 years, go to criminal court for 9 years, and on the criminal side, having seen it from both sides, I think that helps me apply the law in an even manner. Really looking out for the victims. Everybody wants themselves to be safe, but they want their family to get the break. And that's what a judge has to look at. You've got to evenly apply it. And that's what I've spent my whole career trying to build, my knowledge base, so that I can do that. So I can be fair to everybody who comes before me, because nobody ever wants to see a judge. Nobody likes lawyers till they need one, and then they don't even like the lawyer anyway, they just need one. Hey, but we need judges too. And that's why I'm asking for your vote, starting April 30th, May 22nd. It's Kevin Farmer. My website is farmerforjudge.com. If you've got a comment, my email is farmerforjudge@gmail.com. I'll be happy to answer you. Thank you very much for hosting. Thank you for coming. As he said, I know you've had other places to be, but we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I'll just end with this. When I am elected judge, I will not be a judge that creates a backlog. I will not be outworked. I will be there every day making sure that cases are handled in an efficient manner so that the victim can get the justice that they need, that the defendant can get the justice and the fair trial that they need. I have had civil experience. I will make sure when I am in that section of family law that those cases are moved efficiently, because I know personally and through watching it how difficult of a time in your life that is. I will be the judge that works hard, will not be outworked, and I will also make sure that Lady Justice really is blind, and that it is not based on anything but the facts and the law that are before us. And it will be important that everywhere that is affected by crime in Fulton County is treated fairly, and that people are given the chances that they need. I've been here in the trenches for 22 years, seeing what's going on in our court system, and I would like to be part of the solution. And so I'm asking for your vote. Please don't wait till May 22nd, on April the 30th.
Thank you. Let's give them all a round of applause. You are dismissed. Thank you. And let's bring up our second forum. We have Judge Kirk and also Louis Levinson. Thank you. Let's get right into it, and let's manage the time a little better. Is my assistant in here? Nicole, can you keep time for me? Thank you. How are you both?
Wonderful, thank you.
Excellent. We will begin with a 1 minute and 30-second introduction. And from that 1 minute and 30-second introduction, we will get into our Q&A. And then I'll go to the audience for questions, and we will end with a 1 minute closing, okay? Let's begin, and sir, I'll begin with you. 1 minute, 30-second introduction.
Good evening. My name is Louis Levinson. I'm offering myself for the Chief Fulton County Magistrate position in Fulton County, which, by the way, this election is, May 22nd, is the first ever historic election that the Chief Magistrate of Fulton County will be elected. Judge Kirk was appointed by the governor in 2014. She took office in 2015, but this election is the first time that the voters will ever decide who the Chief Magistrate is. Magistrate Court is the busiest court in the state, the busiest. Literally 50 to 100,000 cases, landlord-tenant, civil cases, garnishment cases, criminal. That's the entry-level court for all the criminal cases that come through and ultimately get to the state or the Superior Court. Warrants are issued there, search warrants, arrest warrants, and the initial determinations are made there in that magistrate court as to whether the case should proceed up to the Superior Court or the state court. I've been a resident of Fulton County since, well, almost 40 years. Went to Emory Law School, graduated in 1978. What's the matter?
You got 10 seconds, close your fine, go ahead.
And the important part that I want to emphasize, which I should have led with this instead, I was a magistrate in Fulton County for 30 years. I sat on the bench hearing hundreds of thousands of cases, literally. I'll explain that to you if you wish later. And resigned in 2015 and now offer myself for the election.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all for having me. Thank you for allowing us to be here, and thank you all for coming. My name is Cassandra Kirk. I am the Chief Magistrate Judge in Fulton County. I offer myself, and I asked you to keep Kirk on May 22nd, 2018. I'm running for this position because I am committed to using my experience, my platform, and my partnerships to move Fulton County Magistrate Court in the path of progress. My experience includes service as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, as a civil litigator, as an administrative director, and as a full-time judge on both the Fulton County Magistrate Court and the Fulton County Juvenile Court. While serving as a Fulton County Juvenile Court, it's important to note that I wasn't just simply on the bench. I was also the judge that started the first juvenile drug court program in Fulton County. And so my passion is to protect and serve Fulton County families. That's what I have been doing for over 25 years, and that's what I intend to continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. People call Magistrate Court the People's Court. You have the most interaction with citizens in the county than any other court. And you have to be very sensible, very knowledgeable. You deal with some complex legal and civil issues. What's in your background that would best qualify you more so than your opponent for this position? I would go to Mr. Levinson on that one.
Well, the fact that I literally sat on the bench every week for over 30 years, starting in 1984. The Magistrate Court was only created in 1983, and I was appointed early on in the tenure of the court and heard all those cases, civil cases, criminal cases, landlord-tenant cases, and the criminal cases as well. And there is no substitute for experience. Admittedly, Judge Kirk has been on the bench for 3 years. I don't know that she has presided over that many cases, but she couldn't have possibly because she hasn't been there for 30 years. That's not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but if there is a question of experience in all the divisions of the court, then I would say that I'm qualified. I hate to say I'm more qualified than anybody else. Was that a minute and a half again?
1 minute for these.
That's
10 seconds to wrap up. You're fine.
In addition to being on the bench, I've been a litigator in both civil and criminal cases for over 40 years. Meaning I've been in the courtrooms of this state and this county doing civil and criminal work for a long time, and that's part of the qualification that comes and brings experience to the bench.
Thank you. And same question.
And thank you for that question, because part of being chief magistrate judge is not about whether you can try a case or not. Part of that is about whether or not you can administer the day-to-day business of this court. As a chief magistrate, you are the person responsible for the appointment of 30 judges. You are the person responsible for the training of those 30 judges. It is my philosophy that the judges ought to be respectful, that they ought to be trained in every area that the court handles, and that is what I have done in this period of time. And so, while I have not been on the bench every single day, I sit 2 days a week. The other thing that I have done is I've paid the court's bills. I've updated, actually I created the court's website. So the first magistrate court website, that was what I did. It took my weekends, it took my nights. So it's more than just figuring out how to sit on the bench. I am NETA trial certified, teacher trained in those skills. I am also child welfare law certified. I've taken particular courses as it relates to procurement and how procurement should move forward. So I am uniquely qualified in various different tasks to serve as the chief judge.
Thank you. Let's talk about the current judicial philosophy that you both share, okay? And I see you smiling because you're just ready to answer this question. A magistrate court judge has a lot of administrative responsibility, okay? And some of that obviously plays into the role as an individual who will decide a case, will decide cases referencing civil primarily. What is your judicial philosophy when it comes to disputes between two citizens? Disputes come before your courtroom. And I'll start with you, Judge Kirk.
May I stay seated?
Yes, you can.
And so the magistrate court is heavily a self-represented litigant court. What that means is we try to do our best to help litigants reach their decision. Because what you are told at the beginning of every civil case is that we have mediators available, please use them. I want to point out that during my tenure, I have made sure that mediators were available in both the North and South Annex. Previously, they were only available downtown. What that does is allow citizens to make their decisions, because as you all know, it's better for you all to reach conclusion than for a judge to reach the conclusion for you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, in furtherance of what Judge Kirk said, the mediation system that was put into place in the early 90s was put in my court. That's where it began, because we were able to institute it by getting AVLF and other organizations to provide the funding for mediators in that court. But about judicial philosophy, having heard lots of cases, it isn't important, it's just as important for the people who come into the court to leave feeling that they've been treated right, regardless of the outcome. Because, you know, if the decision is one or the other, somebody is going to be unhappy with the judge's decision. Unlike the state and superior court, which has jury trials, magistrate court does not have jury trials. So it's all the judge. And so it's equally important that people leave there feeling, if they've lost, that they were treated fairly and they came away with the sense that they were able to receive justice, even as a loser.
Thank you.
Mr. Ritchie, if I could make one correction. And so The mediation services that Mr. Levinson is referring to were those for particularly landlord-tenant. The mediation services have been expanded to include small claims civil, as well as our warrant application calendars.
Mr. Levinson, did you want to respond to that? Okay.
She's right.
Okay. Let's talk about community involvement. To what level are you currently involved in community endeavors outside of your legal profession? And Judge, I'll start with you on this one.
I believe that before you can judge the citizens in your community, you must serve your community. I come from a family of service. I am a member of the sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I have been a member since 1994. In that position, I have served various roles. I am also a member of the League of Women Voters of Atlanta Fulton County, where I have been co-chair for various forums such as this one. I also serve on the boards of the Street Grace, which is aimed at domestic minor sex trafficking, as well as Star C, which is aimed at stability and housing. You will see that what I do inside my community reflects who it is I am and my decision to protect the citizens of Fulton County.
Thank you.
Some years ago, 1980 to be exact, I was appointed by the probate judge to be the county guardian and the county administrator. What that means is that there are people who are incapacitated, adults, and there are estates for which no one has come forward to administer those estates. That work is done on a pro bono basis because there are no funds to pay people to do that. That has evolved into my service with a number of organizations with respect to the dementia, the growing dilemma of dementia in the United States. If I had more than a minute and a half, I'd be able to tell you the statistics about how many people suffer with dementia and it goes unnoticed and are treated improperly by the medical community and the legal community, but I don't have the time.
Let's talk about usability of the courtroom. I've received phone calls on my show. People have dealt with magistrate court years past. To them, they said it was tough to navigate. What are the protocols in place for the citizen? Because as you said, primarily citizens represent themselves in this court. So what are the protocols in place to streamline that process and make it easier for them? And if you would like to implement additional protocols to make it easier for them, and Mr. Levinson, I'll start with you.
Well, let me say, when the Supreme Court of Georgia directed the magistrates around the state, by the way, there were 159 magistrate courts in this state, because that's the number of counties. They said that the charge to the magistrate court was, quote, do substantial justice. And that isn't quite the same as the candidates for Superior Court are required to follow the law. The Civil Practice Act, for example, which is a fancy term for rules of civil procedure, it doesn't apply in the magistrate court. So it gives judges, particularly the chief judge of the court, a heck of a lot more discretion to carry out the intention of the law rather than the letter of the law. And that's a huge value when you're dealing with a landlord and a tenant fighting over property, or a civil case, putting aside whether it can be settled outside of court through mediation.
Thank you. Same question, Judge Kirk.
And so in 2017, as court administrator, I applied for and received a grant from the National Center for State Courts. We were one of 4 courts to receive that grant. The purpose of it was to work on a pilot project in order to make our high volume calendar more usable. And what that means is people coming in off the street, how is it that they can feel that they can get justice done? So what we have done is, if you go to our website, you will see that there are videos. There are videos that walk you through what it is that happens in a case, so that's part one. The second thing we've done is we have implemented pamphlets. And so pamphlets tell you part one, step 2, step 3. There are pamphlets for our high volume cases. The high volume cases I'm talking about are landlord-tenant cases, our small claims cases, less than $15,000, as well as our garnishment matters. And so those are very tricky matters that the public deals with every day, and we have implemented systems to make that possible. I have one more thing, and that is we have implemented the Housing Assistance Center in order to help navigators as it relates to the landlord-tenant cases.
Okay, thank you. And for this question, I'll start with Judge Levinson. If a person comes to you, they have a dispute, and in this dispute, they may be in the wrong, and the law will say you have to move, you have to get out. As a magistrate judge, are you able to apply compassionate justice to give them more time to move from their property before ruling, even though you know they technically are in violation and should lose the case?
Well, the answer is yes. The law simply requires that you cannot give a tenant who's evicted less than 7 days. That's what the law is. But that does not preclude a judge from taking into account the charge from the Supreme Court, which is do substantial justice, and give that person more time. Or, alternatively, and I know this is revealing a super top secret now, sometimes the best decision by a judge is no decision at that moment. A continuance or a postponement of the case works substantial justice because, in answer to your specific question, though I wouldn't tell this to the litigants, and I ask you please keep my secret, the idea is let the litigants go home and sort of cool off. Sometimes those cases don't come back. That happens about 50% of the time. And sometimes if they do come back, essentially I've achieved what the question suggests, which is granting the tenant more time.
Same question, Judge Kirk.
And so the magistrate's job is to do substantial justice. The magistrate's job is also to follow the law. And at times you make decisions that are uncomfortable, and you have to explain to the tenant, this is what the law requires that I do. But in order to have finality for the tenant, for the landlord, unless the parties agree to something different, the judge should follow the law, no matter how difficult and uncomfortable it is.
Okay. And I'm managing the time, so let's go to our Q&A from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I will recognize you for your question to this panel. Yes, sir. Dr. Cobble, good to see you.
My question is, while your experience and has dealt with the landlord-tenant, what can you tell us, especially in dealing with people of color? Tell us about the foreclosure where individuals may have, whereas processes of illegal and fraudulent processes has been done on individuals' property, but yet they come before your bench to remove them from their property. What can you tell us, especially with people of color, that you will render justice to be sure that they won't leave your court that feeling that they was able to get something done on their behalf?
I assume your question is directed at me. The answer is Georgia was one of the highest volume of residential foreclosures in this state. It was also one of the highest volume of fraudulent foreclosures in this state, excuse me, in this nation. If I said state, I meant nation. Apologize. And the answer to your question is a little bit technical, but I'll try to parse through it, sir. In order for someone, a lender, for example, that's foreclosed on a piece of property, or an investor, to foreclose and evict, there are a multitude of procedural prerequisites that have to be followed. And I will tell you that 95% of those who foreclosed did not know what those procedures and those prerequisites were. So the result is, and frankly, most of the people who were the defendants were people of color. And so, though that wasn't a factor in my mind, here's a set of rules that says this is what you got to do to foreclose on a piece of property and then to evict someone following a foreclosure. And the result was that a lot of those cases got dismissed. On the other hand, Oh, on the other hand, there were a lot of opportunists out there who took advantage of this when there were a lot of vacant homes in all the communities around Fulton County. People just move into somebody's house. Now, if that was next to your house where they moved into it, guess what happened? That house, nobody took care of it because it was being occupied by essentially interlopers or, vagrants. And it ran down the values of the houses in the neighborhood, causing the crisis of devaluation of all the real estate in the county to suffer. So it isn't quite as simple as, it's not a simple analysis. There's a lot of community factors that go into keeping everyone, those who live alongside of those properties and those who are being victimized, in being treated fairly. I want to say one other thing about I've always, in my private practice, which has continued since 1978, I've always fashioned myself something of a fighting City Hall. Literally fought City Hall, for example, literally, Atlanta City Hall. When the Olympic vending case began, you may remember that the Atlanta Committee for the Olympics, through then Mayor Bill Campbell, sold permits or licenses to folks who were almost 100% minorities from around the United States. They were all ripped off. I fought City Hall as their lawyer for 10 years. 10 years in the courts until the case settled after Mayor Franklin became the mayor and saw fit to settle the case. So it wouldn't be correct to say because I'm a middle-aged white male, I'm ignorant of the issues that affect everyone.
All right, thank you. Did you want to answer that as well?
I'm unsure it was directed to me, but I can tell you that I come from two parents from Mississippi who look just like me. I have been black my whole life. It is it's something that I take to my bench, those experiences, in places where I maybe should not have been, those experiences, as well as places where I was welcome. And so I understand what it's like to come into a building to be confused. And so anyone will tell you that has seen me in juvenile court that the first thing I did was level the playing field, make sure that each of the sides understood what was happening. The same thing in magistrate court. There is an opening statement that happens so that everyone can understand what's going to happen today.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
I still really don't understand. I mean, his question it wasn't really answered because about 65% of black people do lose their homes, and a lot of people that are homeless have lost their homes. And by the time Wells Fargo or a lot of these mortgage companies do their robo-sign and all their fraudulent illegal acts, we don't even have the power to do anything. It's already done. So we, as African Americans and even poor white people, we don't get the same level of legal advice and legal help. And as you said this morning on your show, even black people do each other wrong. So it's not just per se a white man or a black person per se. It could be any person, but it's always the majority of African Americans.
So may I respond?
And poor white
Sure.
people.
I'll let you both respond to it.
What I will tell you is that is the reason that the navigators are in the magistrate court now. So in the clerk's office in TG 100, there is a housing assistance center. Those are people that will help you navigate what's going on in the system. They will help you figure out if in fact you need assistance further from Atlanta volunteer lawyers. And it's because people come in. Landlord-tenant cases are fast-moving cases. You are absolutely correct. But in order to level the playing field, because as a pro se litigant, as a self-represented litigant, you don't know all the same rules that the lawyers know on the other side. And so that was one way of leveling the playing field, because I am conscious of that. I'm aware of that.
Thank you. Judge Levinson.
What I think you're asking is, how do we balance the fact that, and there's no denying that the vast majority of people who are tenants in Fulton County are African American. The vast majority of the tenants who come into the court in Fulton County as tenants are African American. If someone complains about being wrongfully foreclosed upon, is that your question, ma'am?
Well, it's just that there's a higher level of African Americans that are unlawfully and illegally foreclosed upon, and I've actually met with my mortgage holders, and you got people like Wells Fargo. They do fraudulent stuff all the time, and it's very well known. It's not just them. Okay.
Let me
And she's talking about market manipulation.
Yes, let me answer this, and let me
Unlawful
say
home foreclosure.
that Superior Court Judge Willis or Farmer or Wolf would have to be the ones to decide the issue of title. And let me explain why. The legislature does not give to the magistrate court the ability, we call it jurisdiction, to decide title. So let's say you were claiming that you had been the victim of a fraudulent loan and then were foreclosed upon improperly, which by the way happens all the time. Even if I wanted to, I could not undo that foreclosure. But what I can do, and what I did do for 30 years, is I would say, I'm going to reset this case so you can get a lawyer and go to Superior Court. One of the, just using the example of the persons who are running for Superior Court, go before one of those 3 judges and get an injunction against the mortgage company to evict you in my court. Then they show up with a piece of paper that's got one of their signatures on it. That ends my case. Because the magistrate court in the food chain is the lowest court, and there are higher courts, and there's no higher court in our state than the superior courts of our state. So the answer is, if I suspected, if I had a hint or a scent that there was something wrong with it, there are ways, without deciding what I can't decide, to give that person the ability and the time to get what they need in another court, which does have subject matter jurisdiction. I didn't write these rules. And to some extent, we judges can't create our own set of rules. I understand the frustration, because I saw it every day for a long time, but there are ways to protect people who are truly victimized.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And we are running flat out of time. I have enough opportunity here for a closing statement from both candidates and Judge Levinson. I will start with you. And for those who are wondering why I'm calling him judge, he's a former judge. Anyone who's a former judge, I would retain that title in debate formats, okay?
Thank you very much. The magistrate court is different from most courts. I'll give you an example. If I were elected, I would have an open door policy, which is to say, if any member of the general public has got a grievance, not with the way a specific case was decided, because that would be improper. You got a grievance with the way the system is operating, you come see me. My cell phone number will be published in the, whatever the website is for the magistrate court. Now, a lot of people when I was on the bench would call me up and say, Judge, I didn't like the decision you made yesterday, and I have to hang up that phone. But if somebody calls me up and says, I think that the clerk's office isn't doing what they're supposed to do, or I think that there's a faster and better way of achieving case management or court management, then what I would do, and I did this when I was on the bench, convened a meeting with lawyers for the plaintiffs, lawyers for the defendants, members of the community that are both pro se and businesses, and I said, come on, let's sit down and have a talk about it. We learn a lot of stuff that we don't know because there are so many judges in the magistrate court. Each of them is sort of touching the elephant at one point, and they're not seeing the whole elephant from a 20 or 30 foot distance. And I do think that is doing substantial justice. I also want to say that I don't think there really is any substitute for experience as a courtroom person. I think having served as judge all those years and having retired when Governor Deal appointed Judge Kirk gave me the perspective that there was a need to come back and correct some things. Tonight's not the night to talk about those specifics, but I believe that there are ways of saving the county hundreds of thousands of dollars and making the court system more efficient. And I'd like to be able to do that if I'm elected. Thank you.
My name is Cassandra Kirk. I am the Chief Magistrate Judge in Fulton County. For the past 3 years, I have served this court. For the past 3 years, I have brought innovation to this court to ensure that it is efficient and that it is accessible. I will continue to do so. Some of the highlights of what I have done during my service is we have closed 30,000 small claims cases that were backlog cases, closed in 2 years. Those cases have been open from 2010 to 2015. One of the other things that we have done is we have appointed judges in an open process. And you've heard today that whomever wins this seat will appoint 30 judges. Why is that important? Because when people are asking about civil justice, when people are asking about criminal justice, it's important for the community to be represented. I will tell you that of the state court bench, 5 of those 10 judges had been magistrates. Of the Superior Court bench, 6 of those 20 judges had been magistrates. The magistrate court could be a training ground for those people that wish to step to the next level. The other thing I want to tell you is that I have increased the efficiency of the court. I have increased the usability of the court. I'm asking for your support in asking that you keep Kirk on April 30th and May 22nd, 2018.
Thank you. Thank you both. Let's give both of these candidates a round of applause. Thank you, Jax. Let's also thank our moderator. I'm going to ask our sponsor, Reverend Love, to come forward to close us out. But as he comes, there's just a couple of points I want to make, and thank you again to all the candidates for being here, participating in this exercise, which I think is really important for this reason. This is a rare opportunity, folks. We don't get this opportunity every time elections come around. We have an opportunity this year by our votes to really influence the quality of justice in this state. It doesn't happen all the time. A lot of times these positions are filled by appointment. But this isn't an occasion in which these appointments are going to be filled by election. Guess what? If you really are interested in influencing the quality of justice, and you are determined to do that by going to the polls and voting in November, guess what? It's too late. It's going to be too late. The decision is going to be made in the spring, folks. You heard from these candidates that early voting begins on the 30th of April. The final day of elections is May 22nd. And that is the window that you have. We urge you all to exercise the opportunity that you have. It's a rare opportunity, and get out during that period, early as possible. Often is not possible, but early as possible. We urge you to come out and participate in this process because it's it's not a once in a lifetime opportunity, but it's a rare opportunity. Reverend Love.
Thank you very kindly. And we want to, my mother always said, give credit to whom credit is due. And I just want to thank Attorney Charles Johnson, because he has been the one that's primarily been pushing all of us to get involved in the judicial races. And that I want to thank you for that. And that he deserves a lot of credit, not just him, but his organization in order to do that. I want to thank
Betty Ann Hart, who's here, is part of our steering group.
Great, thank you so much. Also, Brother Rashad Richards, bright young man. We thank you so much for that. I want to call. Let me just call you up here a minute. No, yeah, rather. One of the things that we try to do in the voter empowerment collaborative, we're nonpartisan. That means that we do not endorse candidates and we don't promote political parties. But what we try to do is to educate the public, and that language is very important. Most of you out there are in that genre, in that legal, where you understand various language. But a lot of times the lay public don't understand that. So I just want to kind of ask you to help us lay people kind of understand. Let me give an example of what I'm talking about. In doing voter registration and whatnot, a lot of times we talk about federal elections. And then sometimes I go out and say, well, no, in the odd years we have municipal elections. Now, I just take it for granted that I know that the lay public know what I'm talking about when I say municipal election. But sometimes it's helpful to say, but immediately we talk about city elections. And that can make a lot of difference. So, but I'm just, in terms of voter education, we talk about magistrate court. You know what that is. And you just assume that everybody knows what we're talking about when we say magistrate court. You talk about civil litigation, and you just assume the people know what we're talking about. I mean, what are we talking about when we say civil litigation? What are we talking about? The term criminal. The lay public, in many cases, don't really know what that's about. So could you just, by way of a little voter education, help us to understand that a little civics lesson here is that we start with the smallest unit of governance, and that is the city, right? And then from the city, you go to the county. And from the county, you go to the state. And then from the state, you know, you go into the Court of Appeals and all that kind of stuff. But most of the lay public probably don't know what we're talking about. So help us out. Kind of walk us through the judicial system court things. And let's start with the magistrate. I learned a lot. Magistrate is the first entry. Is that correct?
It's the busiest court, it touches the most people.
Yeah, so as most people with get a traffic ticket or something like that, you go to the magistrate court. Is that correct?
Landlord evictions.
Okay, so just kind of
elections, if you owe money to a debtor or if you owe money to your landlord.
just imagine that you aren't talking to these folks because they already know. But I'm talking about the average person in our pews, the average lay person. Walk us through briefly the court system of things.
Okay, well, magistrate, you had a pretty good, I thought a pretty good explanation, but I'm a lawyer, so what do I know? What do I know? If maybe you don't owe money to somebody that's suing you to collect a debt, but that person alleges that you do, claims that you do. That dispute is in magistrate court. What if you have paid your rent, but your landlord claims you have? That dispute is in magistrate court. So that's the reason why those disputes come up all the time. In fact, a lot of people, because everybody has to live somewhere. Everybody has some kind of debts somewhere. And so that's why that court touches more people than anybody else. You get to large disputes or crimes that are alleged as felonies, or divorces, or disputes about title to land. Those cases are resolved in superior court. And that's where we had 3 candidates who were vying for a position on superior court. And if somebody makes a claim that there is a decision that's been made at the superior court level that they claim is in error, then guess what? That case is appealed and it'll go to one of 2 courts. Either to the Supreme Court in some cases, but most of the time to the Court of Appeals. And Mr. Shigley is here seeking your vote as a member of the Court of Appeals. So those are, there are many levels of courts in this state.
What about the state court? Did you mention that?
The state court is for, that's why I said large disputes or felonies. Because if it's a small dispute, if it's a misdemeanor, if the misdemeanor is charged, then that case is going to be tried in the state court.
What's the misdemeanor?
A misdemeanor, that is to say, a case where the penalty is less than a year. Penalty is less than a year. Or if, for example, let's say somebody is not seeking an injunction.
Injunction, what's that?
Trying to get a judge to stop something. Okay. If you're just trying to get money, that case may find itself in the state court as well. So it's a little complicated. A little complicated. That's why we're here. So that hopefully, once you've been to enough of these forums, if you pay enough attention, it's going to make sense to you after a while.
And I want to thank you. I mean, I was kind of being but I want to thank you for walking us through that. And I want to ask you, those of you who do this all the time and just you know the acronyms and stuff, but just make the lay public and probably 99% of people who come before you and people who are in our pews don't know this stuff like that. And so I want to thank you, and I hope that as we do more of this, we can help us in the lay public kind of understand the process, and as we do that, I think we all will come away winners. So thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. We will have additional forums coming up, and of course we will be looking to turn